He woke before the alarm, just as he always did. The city outside was still a dull gray, its heartbeat slow and deliberate in those hours before sunrise. He sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, letting the stillness settle into his bones before standing and moving through the motions of a morning carved by discipline. There was no luxury in his space, no sleek surfaces, no curated minimalism, just function. Just a desk, a lamp, a closet with clean clothes folded with care, and a set of running shoes waiting by the door. He ran every morning, not for health, not for sport, but for clarity. The pavement beneath his feet gave him rhythm, the cold air gave him focus. He traced the same streets every day, past the corner store that still had broken letters on its sign, past the church that doubled as a shelter, past the block where boys who looked like him were either standing still or already gone. Each mile reminded him who he was and where he came from. Each breath reminded him that he wasn't running away from anything. He was running toward something. Afterward, he showered, dressed, and slipped into the day like a man with no time to waste. He moved through spaces quietly, always observing, always calculating. No one noticed him, not really. That was the advantage of being underestimated. He'd learned that early. People see what they want to see. Clothes, posture, skin. And if you didn't match the picture in their head, you became invisible. Or worse, suspicious. He worked from anywhere. A tablet, a phone, a laptop with a cracked corner. He didn't need offices. He needed signal and silence. Most of his meetings were virtual, most of his clients never saw his face. They heard results, and that was enough. When they did meet him, eventually, they blinked, did a small double take, hesitated just enough to reveal what they hadn't expected. Then they covered it with a smile. Polite, performed. He let them. He never apologized for what he looked like or where he came from. He carried both like a weapon and a shield because he had to. Every room he'd ever entered required that he prove something, that he translate himself, that he calibrate his tone, soften his eyes, measure his presence. And still, sometimes it wasn't enough. But now he was beyond proving. He had spent years building in the dark, moving capital in systems that didn't care about his story as long as the returns were clean. He learned to move money through shells and trusts, to hide equity inside equity, to layer his assets in ways that even experienced firms needed days to untangle. And through that silence, through that invisibility, he built something unshakable. Not a single company, but a portfolio of influence. Real estate, startups, private hospitality, logistics, data infrastructure, things that moved the world while the world looked elsewhere. He had bought his first building at 26, a duplex, then a 5-unit, then a 15, then 100, then a tower. The ownership was always quiet, his name never on the signs, but every decision had his fingerprints. The latest acquisition had been one of precision. A luxury rooftop lounge in the city's wealth corridor. Glass walls, velvet booths, expensive silence. The kind of place where people measured one another by watches and surnames, where deals were hinted at over cocktails and power was exchanged between glances. It had once refused him entry. Twice, actually. He hadn't forgotten. But he hadn't bought it for revenge. He bought it because it was a good deal. Because it was poorly managed. Because the brand was strong, the location stronger, and the return potential undeniable. He didn't need their respect to see the value. He never had. Now, as he sat in a quiet cafe reviewing staff rosters and renovation budgets, he came across the security detail. One name stood out: lead doorman, longest tenured, highest paid. The same man who had looked him in the face and told him no. Not with hate, with certainty. He bookmarked the file, closed his laptop, and finished his coffee. He had a walkthrough scheduled that afternoon. Not as a guest, as the owner. He arrived without a driver. No entourage. No announcement. Just him, hands in his pockets, jacket zipped halfway up, eyes calm. The city was in its golden hour, the light bouncing off glass like champagne. People moved through the district in curated clusters, their laughter crisp, their steps practiced. It was the kind of place where image preceded presence, where access was coded not through language but through fabric and posture. He walked the sidewalk slowly, blending into the rhythm, unnoticed until he stepped into the marble path that led to the front door of the lounge. And there he was, same man, same face, still stationed like a sentry, posture firm, chin slightly lifted. The lead doorman. He saw him coming. Took one glance at the outfit, the skin, the gait that wasn't hurried or deferential. And it clicked into the same protocol that had guided him for years. Without hesitation, he moved into place, half step forward, left arm gently raised, voice prepared to be civil but absolute. There were no slurs. No insults. Just the sharp efficiency of social exclusion. This time, there was a pause. Not from the doorman. From him. He stopped just short of the velvet rope and looked up, not with anger, not with challenge, just with time. Letting the space fill with the weight of recognition. The doorman squinted. Memory flickered. And then he looked uncertain. Before anything else could happen, the front desk manager stepped out, flanked by the head of operations. They moved quickly, eyes wide, voices low but urgent. The manager extended a hand and spoke with apology before the words even formed. The doorman stepped aside slowly, confusion blooming across his face like fog. He looked between them, then back at the man he had turned away twice. Inside, the room felt smaller than he remembered. Not physically, just in presence. The music was lower, the lights warmer, but it no longer had the same gravity. Not now that he knew it had walls and ceilings like any other structure. Not now that he knew he owned it. He was given a tour, not that he needed it. He already had every architectural plan, every blueprint, every maintenance record. He knew which tables made the most in tips, which bartenders moved the most bottles, which suppliers were overcharging. This was just theater. A dance performed by people who had realized too late that their assumptions were out of date. He moved through the space with stillness. Not pride. Not satisfaction. Just precision. He saw the clients, suits, heels, polished smiles. Some of them glanced at him, unsure whether he was talent, security, or trouble. None imagined ownership. And that was the point. He sat in the office for a while after the tour. The door closed behind him, muffling the sound of the lounge. He leaned back in the leather chair, not because it felt like power, but because it used to be unreachable. He remembered being a kid on the outside of places like this, looking in through tinted windows, watching people move like they belonged simply because no one had told them otherwise. The folder was already on the desk, left by operations. Inside, updated staffing list, performance metrics, incident reports. He flipped through it casually until he found the page he wanted. Security. Lead doorman. Years of service, commendations, complaints. It was all there. He didn't mark the file. He didn't highlight it. He just placed it aside. This wasn't about punishing a man for doing what he'd been trained to do in a world built to fear people like him. It wasn't personal. It was systemic. The man at the door was just another layer of the wall. But that wall was his now. He made a note to schedule a staff meeting the following week, not to rehash the past, but to reshape the rules. The first policy he would rewrite was the unofficial one. The one that was never printed but always enforced. The one that said, people like you don't belong here. Because now he did. And so would everyone else who had ever been told they couldn't. The week moved with quiet precision. Staff files were reviewed, supply contracts renegotiated, and the books were scrubbed clean. He didn't micromanage, he orchestrated. From a distance, with calm instruction and calculated timing. It wasn't about control. It was about clarity. Every detail of the operation mattered now because every detail spoke to culture. And culture had been shaped by the same invisible hands that once locked him out. He returned to the building on a Wednesday, this time through the back entrance. The delivery route. The alleyway route. The way the chefs and porters came in. No one saw him arrive. No one made a scene. Inside, he moved between the kitchen, the supply rooms, the staff corridors. He asked questions. Not about numbers. About people. Who gets breaks? Who doesn't? Who eats? Who's invisible? And they answered. Not because he was the owner, but because he listened like someone who had once needed to be heard. The staff meeting came on Friday. Midday. The lounge was closed to the public. No music. No drinks. Just people standing in a space that usually performed wealth and exclusivity. Now it was just a room full of humans trying to figure out what was changing. He stood at the center, not on a platform, not behind a desk. Just present. They had questions. Some spoken, most unspoken. Who was he? Why now? What did it mean? He didn't give a speech. He didn't repeat corporate mantras or quote from playbooks. He spoke like someone who had spent time in rooms like this long before he owned them. He spoke about fairness. About rebuilding trust. About making a space feel not just profitable but honest. And then he said something that made the room go still. He said, "No one gets to be invisible here anymore. Not the dishwasher. Not the doorman. Not the bartender who never got scheduled on weekends because of her accent. Not the line cook whose suggestions were never written down. And not the guests who walked in dressed different, speaking different, looking different. From now on, identity would not be the reason someone was turned away. It would be the reason they were welcomed in." He left the meeting without applause. That wasn't the point. In the days that followed, changes began, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. The dress code was updated. Not relaxed, but revised. Clean, respectful, accessible. The bouncer script was rewritten. No more language that included not our usual clientele. Training sessions were introduced, focused not on optics but understanding. Vendors shifted. So did the art on the walls. New local artists. New voices. The interior didn't lose its elegance, it found authenticity. And then came the guests. Some noticed. Some didn't. But slowly, new faces began to appear. People who had once walked past the building with their heads down now came in with quiet curiosity. Some nervous. Some proud. But all of them entering a space that had once told them, without words, that they were too much or not enough. He watched it happen from the edge. Always from the edge. He'd never needed to be in the spotlight. What mattered to him was the ripple, the thing that moved outward when systems were rewritten from the inside. But not everyone embraced the change. One evening, a longtime patron confronted the new floor manager. He didn't yell. He didn't insult. He just asked, casually, if this new direction was permanent because the place didn't feel exclusive anymore. The floor manager smiled and said, "Exactly." That patron never returned. And that was fine, because some spaces grow by subtraction. And some foundations are made stronger when they're built for everyone, not just those who've always had the key. The 4th month brought clarity. Not because everything was perfect, but because the resistance had become quiet. The kind that lingered not in voices but in glances, in pauses, in moments when people hesitated to celebrate what was changing. Some staff adapted. Others complied out of obligation. And a few waited for the old ways to return, as if his presence were temporary, as if his decisions were part of a phase that would eventually fade. But he didn't move like someone temporary. He moved like someone who had been here long before the lights ever came on. Ownership didn't mean presence every day. It meant structure, intent, sustainability. He delegated. He listened. He met weekly with department heads, not to dominate, but to understand. Every decision flowed through a lens they hadn't been forced to use before. Equity, value, long-term impact. Some of the executives struggled. Not openly, but in subtle forms. They missed the familiar rhythms, the curated clientele, the predictable language, the gatekeeping disguised as quality. They still believed that luxury needed to exclude in order to feel expensive. But the numbers told a different story. Revenue was up. Not just from volume, but from depth, return guests, longer bookings, higher community partnerships. The lounge had become a cultural landmark in the making. Not just a place to drink and pose, but a space where new energy pulsed through every table, every hallway. Word had spread. Artists held pop-ups in the atrium. Storytellers held nights where spoken word replaced the DJ. Business leaders hosted mentoring dinners on Mondays. A new crowd had emerged, not less refined, just less filtered. People who came because they felt welcome, not because they needed to prove they belonged. And still, he remained behind the scenes. On Friday nights, he watched from the corner table upstairs, nursing a glass of water while the room danced below. He observed the way guests spoke to staff now, with eye contact, with intention. He watched the kitchen through security monitors, where the chefs had started developing their own specials and were given credit for them. He reviewed tip distributions, schedules, supplier contracts. Not because he doubted anyone, but because this place carried his name, even if it wasn't printed on the door. That month, something happened he didn't expect. A letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Inside, a short note from the doorman, the one who had blocked him all those months ago. It wasn't long. No excuses. Just acknowledgement. A recognition of something deeper than embarrassment. The kind of shift that comes when a man sees himself in a mirror he didn't know existed. He didn't frame the letter. He didn't respond. But he remembered. Because growth wasn't always loud. Sometimes it looked like a man watching others succeed where he once stood in their way. He saw the doorman, now a floor supervisor, train the new hires with more patience. He watched him hold the door not like a wall, but like an invitation. That mattered. One night, a young woman walked in wearing sneakers and a denim jacket. Her eyes scanned the room nervously, shoulders tense. She didn't fit the aesthetic. Not yet, but she was confident enough to try. And when she approached the front, unsure, the supervisor nodded gently, smiled and said, "Welcome in." He watched the whole thing from upstairs. Didn't smile, didn't move, just watched. Because that moment, that one shift, was everything he'd worked for. A door that didn't shrink people. A space that didn't require translation. A name that didn't require legacy. He took a slow breath and leaned back, letting the sound of the night carry through the walls he once couldn't enter. They belonged to him now. But more importantly, they belonged to everyone who needed to see that someone like them could belong here too. The 5th month was when the city started to notice. Not through headlines or viral clips, but through repetition. The lounge had become something else. Something people couldn't quite name. They still called it high-end, still described it as exclusive, but the exclusivity felt different now. Not curated by skin tone or bank account, but by intention. People came to the lounge because they wanted something real, something sharp, something that didn't whisper through status but spoke clearly through design, music, and presence. He saw it shift from the inside out. On social media, photos began appearing of people who never would have been seen in that space before. Artists, neighborhood organizers, startup founders from overlooked parts of the city. Their tags didn't flex wealth. They told stories. Didn't think I'd ever be welcome here. My first time in this building. Feels different. And it did. The vibe wasn't forced. It was earned. The staff now moved with pride, not obligation. Bartenders pitched their own drink menus. Chefs collaborated on events. Hosts remembered names, really remembered, not because they were trained to but because they wanted to. Every decision he had made in silence was now echoing back in waves of small human victories. But success had its shadows. That month, he was invited to a private networking gala held just a few blocks away. A glossy event filled with investors, real estate developers, and executives. The kind of place where people spoke with one hand in their pocket and the other extended only when necessary. He hadn't been invited because of who he was. They didn't even realize yet that the lounge they kept referencing, that rebranded place getting too much press, belonged to the man standing in front of them. He let them talk. He listened as they dissected his space with veiled language. "It's gotten a little too urban. We need to be careful about shifting the brand. There's a reason we don't market to everyone." He said nothing. He simply noted the names. Not out of revenge. Out of responsibility. Because those were the minds still shaping buildings, still drawing lines, still deciding who got to be in the room and who only got to clean it afterward. When he left the event, he walked the long way back to the lounge. The streets buzzed with nightlife. He passed a group of teenagers laughing too loud, 2 older men playing chess under a street lamp, a food cart with a line of night owls. The city was alive in ways the gala never could be. Back at the lounge, he stepped through the back entrance and into the kitchen. No one flinched. He didn't make himself known. Just walked the floor, felt the energy. A DJ spun quiet beats upstairs. A small poetry group had taken over the private room. In the main area, people were dancing, uncoordinated, joyful, loud in the best way. He stood off to the side and let it wash over him. This wasn't a club. It wasn't a brand. It was a reclamation. He wasn't just proving that Black ownership could exist in luxury space. He was proving that it could redefine it, elevate it, expand it without apology or dilution. And people were watching. That same week, a magazine requested an interview. A feature story. Cover spread. The new face of hospitality. He declined. Respectfully. Firmly. His story didn't belong on a glossy page. It belonged in the room itself. Because the story was already being told by the girl in sneakers who returned each weekend a little less nervous, by the young man who got his first bartender promotion after 4 years in the back, by the poet who had never performed indoors until now. They were the press release. They were the proof. That night, before closing, he sat in the same chair upstairs and watched one more time. Everything he wasn't supposed to do, every ceiling he'd been told was fixed, he had broken without breaking himself in the process. And that, more than ownership, was what mattered most. The 6th month arrived with no grand announcement, no celebration. Just rhythm. The kind of rhythm that comes when a place finally breathes in alignment with the people who fill it. The lounge had grown past its name, past its location, even past its brand. It had become a kind of symbol, not just for the neighborhood but for anyone who had ever been told, by word or by silence, that they didn't belong. He stood on the rooftop that night, the city stretched out below like circuitry, glowing and infinite. The air was crisp, the music below was muffled by the glass, and for once, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Downstairs, things ran without him. Not perfectly, but with care. Staff rotated with confidence. The host greeted everyone by name. A couple celebrated their anniversary at table 4, the one with the best view. And at the far end, near the lounge corner, a young man sat alone, hoodie half-zipped, looking around like he wasn't sure he should be there. He recognized that look. He had worn it for years. Instead of going down, he stayed where he was. Because the difference now was that the staff saw the young man too. And no one moved to stop him. No one questioned him. No one hovered near the door or whispered into headsets. They welcomed him, offered him water, asked if he wanted to hear the specials. He watched it all from above. This was why he had never chased a spotlight. The work was quieter than that. It wasn't about being the center of attention. It was about becoming the foundation that others could stand on. Across the city, similar places had started asking questions. Other venues were shifting policies, revising language, rethinking design. Some reached out for consultation. Some didn't even know why their atmospheres felt wrong now. But he knew. The culture had been rewritten. Not erased, rewritten. He took out his phone and opened a document he hadn't looked at in a while. A folder labeled Entry Denied. Inside, names, dates, locations. Not to shame. Not to post. Just to remember. Just to measure how far he'd come. He scrolled slowly, then closed it. It no longer served him. There was no point in keeping records of locked doors when you've started building your own. That week, a national publication listed the lounge in their top 10 cultural spaces changing the city. The write-up didn't mention his name, just quotes from guests, staff, and artists who described the place as somewhere I can exhale. He read it once, then closed the tab. He wasn't interested in credit. He was interested in momentum, because this story wasn't his alone anymore. It belonged to the new floor manager who'd once been a dishwasher, to the single mother who now booked spoken word nights, to the kid who wore the wrong shoes but came back anyway. The night ended with lights dimming, chairs stacking, music fading, and when he walked down through the back, past the kitchen and out into the alley, no one followed. No one called after him. And that was the beauty of it. He had become part of the place, not above it. He turned left at the streetlight, hands deep in his coat, hood pulled gently forward. A few people passed. No one knew his name. No one stopped him. But that building, that glowing tower of glass and sound, still stood. And it still belonged to the man they once said didn't belong at all.